British police are investigating the sexual assault of a teenager in a first-of-a-kind investigation in the country. The girl was reportedly wearing a virtual reality headset and playing an immersive game in the metaverse when her avatar was attacked by several others. Let's discuss this now with clinical psychologist Dr Rani Samuel. Dr. Samuel, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for speaking to us. Just bring us up to speed. Give us an understanding of what transpired in this alleged gang rape in the metaverse.
Good evening, Hugo. Thanks for having me to discuss this case. There has been no particular details given because this child was below 16 years of age. But in 2022, we had a major case of gang rape in the metaverse, which was openly spoken about. It was actually a metaverse researcher, Nina Jane Patel, who was in her 40s. And when she entered the metaverse, she entered actually a social space where she could meet her friends. And as soon as she entered, she was sexually attacked by 3 male avatars. So the avatars are the digital characters that we have that can enter a virtual space. And these 3 avatars attacked her, groped her, headset was on, so they began spewing abuse at her. They even took photographs, which you are allowed to do in the metaverse. And she was so traumatized by this, she proceeded eventually to take off her headset, and she had to unplug her device because they were still verbally abusing her. And what she reported subsequently was high levels of anxiety, feeling extremely traumatized and distraught. And she's a mature person in her 40s. So we can deduce from that there's probably elements of that happened in the current case that is on the horizon.
Well, analogies have been drawn, or similarities, if you will, to other games. Call of Duty, for instance, where individuals, obviously not having felt the same levels of emotion, have said, well, you know, I've been killed on Call of Duty. So how is this any different to any other game that one might play in the metaverse? I mean, what particularly makes the detail or this event more horrendous than an individual who's playing a game, for instance, in which they're shot and killed, or shot several times and subsequently killed?
I think that's a good point. When we look at trauma as psychologists, trauma for us, the word trauma itself means a wound or an injury caused by an external force. In this case, this was supposed to be a safe space where you could enter, engage. It was not going to be a space, whether in the real world or the virtual world, where you are going to be so-called gang raped virtually. When I think about games, and I know a number of my patients do engage in games where they are shot and they're killed, it's almost like we know the rules of engagement. That if you're playing a particular game, there is an expectation. If it's a war game, there's an expectation there'll be injuries, there'll be killing, there'll be all sorts of things. But no one expects, whether it's in the physical world or in the virtual world, that you're going to enter a space to be gang raped.
So I suppose the one thing that we must talk about, Dr. Samuel, is just how real is the metaverse and that experience? Because if it's going to be traumatic, if it's going to lead to the report of I've received this level of abuse, then it must be as real as life itself.
No doubt. When we think about the metaverse or the virtual reality is neither good nor bad. What will determine the character of virtual reality, of the metaverse, is the participants in it. those people that take part in the metaverse, they will show us what the character of the metaverse will be. And what we're really going to see, the metaverse, the virtual world, is going to mirror the real world. So if we have sexual violence, cyber theft, crime, groping in the physical world, that's going to be mirrored in the virtual world. In the physical world, there's laws, there's consequences, there's rules of law and order. Currently in the metaverse, the only sanction is that the avatar will be blocked off all platforms. So there's no regulation. Social media, for example, which is a precursor to the metaverse, in social media, we have content monitoring. But it's far more difficult to do behavior monitoring, as in the metaverse. And how does one monitor people's behavior? So these are all the challenges. So it's a very real space, a very addictive space. I mean, if any one of us tries to do without our phones for 24 hours, I think we all can admit there'll be a sense of withdrawal. There'll be some anxiety about not having access. So it is a very addictive environment, a very, Meta describes it as having a deep feeling of presence, of being very experiential. So it is a very real, intense, immersive world that we're dealing with.
Are there specific vulnerabilities or psychological factors that make minors more susceptible to the impact of virtual crimes?
I think there's an emotional maturity issue, whether it's in the physical world or in the virtual world. Minors are always more susceptible. They need parental guidance. They need parental protection. So I think the good principle is the things that you would do in the physical world, be it as a minor or be it as a parent, those principles need to apply in the virtual world also.
Now, you talked about children and you spoke about the addiction. And one of the challenges that many parents face, myself included, is just how much internet is okay for our kids, because obviously the more time they spend, the more addicted they become.
I think that's a challenge for many homes. Children are having their own phones and having access at younger and younger ages. And parents, I find, don't really know even the music their children are listening to. They don't know the games, the level of violence required, children being stalked, even in the metaverse, even on games, people sending children photographs. We need to really, as parents, understand this technology and what the risks are. How much time your child should spend will very much be dependent on the kind of child you have and what their responsibilities are, and what as a family you feel is appropriate for your child.
Well, one of the challenges that we have to contend with is sometimes you don't know what you don't know. So you're not monitoring what your child is doing 24/7. And then the next thing, there's this report, such as which was experienced in the United Kingdom, where a minor then goes to her mum or dad or her parents and says, "I've been raped in the metaverse." How do we deal with that?
As a psychologist, we often deal with the crisis, so we never really deal with the build-up to the crisis. How do you deal with it? Firstly, with great difficulty and with a lot of honesty. Let me give you an example. I have a lot of kids who would go to parties on a weekend, perhaps do compromising things in the bathroom. Photographs get taken and it gets spread on social media, or there's a malicious smear campaign. And it's almost like, as parents, we are waking up to this. We make the false assumption that gaming and being in a virtual space is safe. It's actually not safe. There is harm that can come to your children. And for those that are underage, it is still parental responsibility to use social media monitoring tools to have conversations. You would have conversations, for example, if your child visited a new family, if your child came home from school and said, there's a new kid in class, I want to go and visit them, I've been invited. You would do your due diligence as a parent. You would meet the family. You would assess whether this is a safe environment. You would decide and get knowledge about who is going to be there when your child is visiting. So we need to now understand this new technology. I've been telling parents, put the goggles on, put the headsets on, and play the games your children are playing. Start getting an understanding of this particular new world. We need to learn about the metaverse and what role it's going to play, not only in terms of harm. There are many positive aspects of it. As I said, the metaverse the character of it will be determined by its users.
Dr. Samuel, my final question speaks to some parents that we have that are not necessarily literate. So they don't have smartphones, they don't understand what's going on in the metaverse, and potentially can't do some of the things that you're speaking of. So who are the gatekeepers if we as parents can't gatekeep for our kids?
So who are the gatekeepers of this technology?
Yeah, precisely. I mean, if I don't have capacity or capability to do what my kids are doing, because sometimes they're doing it at school or they're doing it elsewhere, and they're coming home to load shedding or to a place where I'm illiterate, for instance. So I'm not in a position physically to assist or prevent. Are these systems in place of gatekeeping outside of what I can do as a responsible parent?
That's a very interesting question. Firstly, the metaverse is a 3D world. And what is interesting, because right now with social media, it's a 2D world. You know, we have our screens and we experience it that way. And what is really interesting, Meta as a company is first going to prepare a metaverse that's 2D before a parallel will be the 3D. So many of our children are going to be exposed to the metaverse on their phones. So it's not just for the 3D experience, and this is going to be one of the thrusts of development. So our children are going to have access to this. So the gatekeeper question is such an important one, because right now there are no laws for the metaverse. As I said, the only sanction is they will block the avatar. So if anything happens there, you must remember, if your child enters a game, anyone from anywhere in the world could enter the gaming space with your child. Or if your child enters a teaching session, because there's teaching sessions in the metaverse, anyone of any age could enter. We don't know if it's male or female. We don't know whether there's a malicious intent involved. So for now, the gatekeeper is still the parent, even at whatever level that is, to say, what are you doing? Let's talk about it. Tell me more about what you're doing. We actually can't give this over to anyone because there's no real gatekeepers of the metaverse right now.
Dr. Rani Samuel, clinical psychologist, unpacking those issues of the metaverse.